Hello, all you positive heads out there. Welcome to the first ever Positive Head podcast. My name is Brandon Beachum, and I will be your host here each and every week on this fascinating journey of self-discovery that I am absolutely ecstatic to begin taking with you all. This exciting new chapter in my own life is the manifestation of a long-time dream to share my passion for discussing what I refer to as the ultimate nature of reality with a broader audience. So thank you all from the bottom of my heart for helping me to make my dream a reality by listening. After 18 years of probing for a deeper understanding of the ultimate truths hiding just behind the veil of this third dimensional reality, and then over enthusiastically sharing the information I've uncovered with anyone that's in my immediate vicinity that will halfway listen, I'm pretty sure it's time to call in reinforcements for my friends and family members. So I figured, what better way to save them all from bleeding out via the ears than to turn my attention to all of you in a weekly podcast. Now, for those of you wondering what the heck I'm referring to when I say the ultimate nature of reality, I'm referring to the greater mysteries of life and existence. I'm referring to the structure and foundation upon which this earthly existence is built upon. So, as a theme on the Positive Head podcast, we will be delving into the mysteries of space, time, and consciousness. We will constantly be attempting to tackle all those big questions like, who are we as human beings? Where did we come from? Where do we go when we die? And what does modern science have to say about all of this? As I mentioned, I've personally been on this path of self-discovery for almost 2 decades now, and after many ups and downs, I finally feel like I have achieved some level of clarity on the subject matter that has resulted in the manifestation of some of my own personal lifelong dreams, which I'll touch on in a bit. So on this ongoing podcast each week, my aim is to inspire those of you listening in some way, shape, or form so that you can also create more of what you want to see in your own reality. Let me just also say, I do not view myself as any kind of a guru or great teacher. I consider myself more of a student than anything else, especially when it comes to understanding something as vast as the ultimate nature of reality. And I'm also keenly aware of how much further I still have to travel on my own journey of self-realization and personal growth. But I'm excited to do so in a very honest and transparent manner right here in front of all of you on this podcast each and every week, in the hopes that we can all continue to learn and grow together. I'll also be bringing many interesting guests on the show to help guide us on our collective journey, individuals doing inspiring things, most of whom are also coming to the same exciting conclusions that I've been, the realization that we are all one with the universe and each other, the realization that we are all no more, no less than fractals of the same divine energy, but just wearing different human masks. I believe most of the world is simply suffering from amnesia regarding this ultimate truth and have yet to fully recognize and realize there is only one consciousness and we are all collectively it. From the ultimate perspective, I would say there's only one of us even listening to this podcast right now because you are all other me's and I'm just another part of you. I'm just here talking to myself. Damn, maybe I am crazy after all. But seriously, I firmly believe that it's high time we all start conducting our lives from a perspective that is in line with what is actually going on here. All is literally one, so act accordingly. Because if we're going to save this planet, we must all wake up to the truth that the separation between us is an elaborate illusion. Science has basically proven that this reality is holographic in nature and made of vibrating light projections, simply slowed down enough to create the stuff we call physical matter. And myself and a growing number of others believe that we are the ones that actually created this illusory stage before incarnating here in the physical dimension so that we could have the experience of waking up within the dream and remembering who we truly are. And that's divinity incarnate. Once we wake up to this ultimate truth, then we get to the fun part. We get to have the experience, the joy of rediscovering our true selves and the unlimited abundance and power that comes along with it. I mean, can you feel that excitement in this moment as you hear my words telling you that you're literally a divine, all-powerful being that has simply forgotten yourself so that you could have the experience of remembering this eternal truth once in your physical body? I would say that feeling, that excitement is not just a coincidence, coincidence, but at a soul level, you know this to be true. It feels familiar in some way. There's nothing that I or anyone else can tell you that your soul doesn't already know. All I can do is remind you of what your soul has forgotten. Now, for some of you listening, this is easier to grasp, and you've already known this for quite some time or considered this for quite some time. For others of you, it is more of a challenge to consider, and I certainly respect that. All I ask is that you listen with an open mind and heart, and if you can do that each week, you may just start having positive, game-changing experiences in your own life that demonstrate to you firsthand that I'm speaking the truth. I'm a firm proponent of never taking any man or any book's word for something as important as understanding the nature of your own reality and connection to divinity, but rather experiencing for yourself. Reading or listening to someone like me is one thing, and it can certainly be helpful and lead you in the right direction, but I believe firsthand experience is the only way to fully know the truth. Which is exactly what is starting to happen on an exciting scale around the world. More and more people are having firsthand experiences that show them this truth, and sometimes in a very dramatic and inspiring manner, as I'll be discussing more about in a moment. So, in an effort to aid in the great shift that is slowly but steadily beginning to sweep our planet, and in the spirit of continuing to expand and explore my own cosmic curiosity, I figured what better way than to do so than with a weekly podcast where I have conversations with some of the consciousness change makers out there. I'll be talking to all the incarnate light workers doing amazing things to make a difference, to expand awareness on our little blue spaceship that is hurtling at a tremendous speed throughout this infinite universe. I'll be talking to everyone from authors to bloggers, entertainers, filmmakers, teachers, healers, scientists, metaphysicians, conscious business leaders, really anyone out there on the front lines doing whatever they can to play their part in expanding consciousness. Because myself and many others believe we're at a critical juncture in the evolution of the human species where we need to all wake up before humanity becomes the next extinct species. You see, once you realize your divine origins, the only thing to do is help wake others who are still sleeping, because we're all connected, and as a species, we're only as strong as our weakest link. I believe that for us to make the cut and advance to the next exciting stage in our collective evolutionary journey, a tipping point in awareness across the planet is essential. It must take place first. So I applaud anyone out there trying to make a difference. And once again, I'm just so happy and grateful to be playing some small part in getting their stories out there. Now, in addition to hearing about my guest journeys and the cutting edge projects that they're spearheading or involved in, for those of them that have stories, I'll be discussing any positive paranormal stories they've experienced. Stories either paranormal in nature or perhaps just a really interesting story of synchronicity. Synchronicity is what the famous psychiatrist Carl Jung defined as a meaningful coincidence. I personally like to refer to these sorts of events that defy conventional explanation as real magic, because that's exactly what they feel like to me on the occasion where I've had such experiences. So I decided, because it's such a favorite topic of mine, to add this segment as a part of the Positive Head podcast, since I've had several firsthand experiences of what I consider to be real magic in my own life, some of which I'm actually going to share with you in my next podcast. And I'm confident that some of the people I'll be interviewing will have had some sort of similar experience themselves to be on the path that they're on. I'm sure not all my guests will have, have a story that falls into this category to share. But if they do, you can guarantee I'm going to get them to spill the beans about it, because I find the topic fascinating and don't feel like we hear enough of these inspiring stories in the media. I'm so, weary of all the negative paranormal stories that are perpetuating fear out there in TV land, or even in the movies where, horrible ghosts are tormenting young children and families and driving them all insane. And, I realize some of these experiences may be real and actually happening to people, but I also realize that, what you give energy to, you create more of. Where attention goes, energy flows, which is why I personally choose not to watch horror movies or fear-based programming. So What I want to do is draw attention to the ever-increasing, inspiring, and positive, magical stories that are happening out there. And I hope that by hearing these real-life accounts week after week, or at least whenever, I come across someone who has a great story to share, it may open up some of my listeners, eyes and ears to the fact that these sort of beautiful, magical things do go on. It's not all doom and gloom. It's just a matter of what you're tuning your vibration to. I believe once you start, believing these types of experiences are even possible, you too can have your own inspiring experiences where, the universe or higher self or spirit, whatever you want to call it, can lead you as it has with me and many others. So for the remainder of this podcast, I want to give you some background into who the heck I am, how I've personally used my understanding of the ultimate nature of reality through, my own fair share of trial and tribulation, mind you, to ultimately create magic in my own life. Because let's face it, talk is cheap. Action and results are the great communicator. And so I want to lay it all out on the table to share some intimate insight into my own failures, my own successes on my personal journey of self-discovery that has led me up to this point in my own life. I sincerely hope that by me bearing it all and telling my story, you can all relate in some way to my failures and realize that, of course, we all go through trials and tribulations. And I also hope that you can draw some inspiration from some of my successes and realize how true the statement is, you only lose when you quit. So I was born and raised on the East Coast in Chesapeake, Virginia, which is on the coast near Norfolk and Virginia Beach, if you're familiar with either of those more well-known cities. I come from a really great family, albeit a very conservative one, where we went to church every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. You could get into trouble for using either of the H words, heck or hell. You can probably imagine it wasn't pretty that time I slipped up and mumbled the F word under my breath. And my dad, who still door knocks every weekend to invite people to church, heard me say it. I still have a limp to show for that one to this day. No, just kidding. Didn't really happen. But overall, I had a great upbringing. Love my parents, who are still together to this day. And in their defense, they've loosened up a heck of a lot since those days. So my childhood was pretty normal overall. I was always playing basketball, tennis, or into something with all my neighborhood friends. My mom also says that what I jokingly refer to as my delusions of grandeur started at about 7 years old, where I would proclaim that I was going to be rich and famous and make a huge impact on the world. So, started very young. I actually set out to do that with my first of many entrepreneurial ventures at about 11 years old. By investing my allowance in 5-cent candies from 7-Eleven every day, then selling them for $0.25 each at school. Pretty soon, I was the richest kid in the neighborhood, making $10, 10 whole bucks profit a day. Of course, that lasted for all of 2 weeks until all the other entrepreneurial spirits in my class started doing the same thing, and selling candy at school got banned. So I quickly moved on to my next entrepreneurial venture, a paper route, which I had for several years. And then a few years later at 17, I started a successful home pressure washing business, which ultimately helped support me through college. My parents being, as far as college goes, being the conservative folks that they were, they really wanted me to attend the same college that my older sister Melissa attended. It's called Freed-Hardeman University. Freed-Hardeman is a very small, very conservative Christian school in the middle of nowhere, about an hour or so from Memphis, Tennessee. I was personally just excited to live on my own for the first time in my life. And actually, I really ended up enjoying my time there, especially because there was plenty of ridiculous rules to break, at least until I finally got kicked out for being one of the quote-unquote party kids and constantly breaking those rules at the end of my junior year. So from there, since my credits would transfer easily, I moved to a sister school a few hours away in Nashville. It's called David Lipscomb University. Now, up until this point, I suppose you could say that I was a Christian myself, although I was always troubled by what I perceived as many holes in the logic. So I wasn't really the most diligent or committed Christian boy, but I did go to church on most Sundays. It was around the age of 21 or so, once I moved to Nashville, where I met a girl who claimed to have psychic ability, that I started considering ideas above and beyond those that were drilled into my head, from the time I was a small child until, I was 21. At first, I wasn't really convinced from her, by her claims, but after we did an experiment, I'll never forget one time where she apparently was able to read my mind. Maybe I don't know. I don't know how exactly she did it, but let's just say my mind was opened quite a bit by that display. So I started exploring other schools of thought by reading books on all sorts of, metaphysical and spiritual subject matters. I was fascinated by what I read, and then had a few other experiences of my own that really shook my reality to the core. After that, I was officially hooked and ecstatic about what I was discovering. Couldn't believe how relatively unknown, a lot of the concepts I was learning about were to the average person. It all just, the more I learned and the more I read and so forth and investigated, it just made so much more sense to me than what I'd been raised to believe. And most importantly, I was having what you might refer to as spiritual experiences of my own, not just reading about other people's stories from thousands of years ago. And that's how my passion for the subject initially ignited, and why I started talking about the subject incessantly with anyone who would listen. Now, keep in mind, this was the mid-90s, and in those days, there weren't too many people that I could find that were interested in the subject matter, except for, a few very close friends. Most people, they'd usually listen to me. I was real excited about it. So they'd usually listen to me rant about the subject, hear my take on spirituality, and either acknowledge that the unusual concepts I was presenting were interesting before they would go back to their own, comfortable views of the world and reality, or, they would just think I was batshit crazy. Only really in recent years, especially through the growing transformational festival scene at events like Burning Man and Lightning in a Bottle, have I started to meet others who are as passionate about the subject as I am. Now, as I mentioned in my next podcast, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my own positive paranormal experiences, my stories of what I consider to be and like to call real magic, as well as I'm also going to introduce you guys to my longtime friend and co-host, Danny Villalobos, aka Dalian. He will sit in on some of my podcasts, and you can think of him as my Robin Quivers. Or, hell, you can even think of him as Robin the superhero if you want. Take your pick, depending on whether you prefer Howard Stern or Batman. The theory with having him on the show is that his intelligent, calm, cool demeanor should help to even out my spazziness. It's also appropriate to have him on the show because he's probably shared my spiritual journey with me more than anyone else, aside from maybe my brother Ryan. I met Dalian in Nashville about the same time I was having my spiritual epiphany, and he has spent many a late night with me discussing the concepts and ideas that these podcasts will center around. So take one night of late night discussions revolving around the realization that we're all extensions of God in the physical, and as a result can be and create anything we desire. Mix that with a beautiful batch of mind-expansive magic mushrooms. Next thing you know, soon after graduating from college, you're in a band moving your happy ass to Southern California. Me, Dalian, my brother Ryan, a few others formed a band called Kundalini at that time. We named ourselves after the Sanskrit word referring to the energy source at the base of the spine that you can activate and raise through meditation or other spiritual disciplines like yoga, which is a goal of Kundalini yoga, actually, which some of you probably heard of, I'm sure. And if you raise your Kundalini, it's supposed to help attain creative enlightenment. But as far as the music itself, I've always been a huge music lover. And at that time, this is like late 1997, we were, huge fans of bands like 311, Rage Against the Machine, Incubus, who had just come out and ultimately became a big influence on us. And of course, for me, my favorite of all time, the Beastie Boys. I just thought they were so damn cool, talented, unconventional, and funny. I could definitely relate to their quirkiness. I still, love them to this day. So our setup was guitar, bass, drums, 2 vocalists. I was the MC. I had always fancied myself a writer ever since having a Christmas story submitted to a children's magazine by one of my teachers in elementary school. Since I never had much of a singing voice, but still had more than my fair share to always say and was always using plays on words, rhyming seemed like a perfect fit as my mode of expression. We would always jokingly say that I was the rhyme and our singer was the reason. For me, it was was really such an amazing and fun time. And to this day, I still thoroughly enjoy the creative outlet to express myself through writing mind-expansive rhymes. Since I'm typically very philosophical with my lyrics, for me, I feel like the songwriting process is just putting my poetry to a beat. I probably would have been a beat poet if I was born 50 years earlier. So yeah, that's kind of the story of my music. And me, we formed, let's see, in Nashville, and about 9 months later, I guess, we up and moved to California. As I mentioned, now I'll give you one little interesting psychic happening that occurred around that time that was pretty impressive. I was in Atlanta, Georgia, visiting an ex-girlfriend, and we decided to get a psychic reading from some lady, just, spur of the moment. She had a little booth set up on the side of a street where we were walking around one day. This was about a year before we formed Kundalini. When the lady started my reading, she said, "I see you in a cold place like Chicago working in business. But are you involved in music in any way? Because I see another path for you in music." Now, keep in mind, at that time, I was a senior in college. I was planning to move to Chicago, work for my uncle's company when I graduated. So when she said that, my jaw kind of hit the floor when she mentioned Chicago and business. That was my plan. It wasn't until a year later that we decided to start a band during a psilocybin-fueled night of inspiration. And we just happened to meet someone who had moved to Nashville from Huntington Beach, California, who was a fan of the band and convinced us that we should take our music to the burgeoning, music scene at that time in Orange County, California. So how did this woman, foresee these two paths? Some may ask. Was it just a lucky guess? I highly doubt it. I actually went to a second psychic about a year later, a few months after forming the band, and she said I was going to move to California and be involved in music as well. I had never even visited California at that time. So what I would say is happening in both of those instances is that since time doesn't really exist, they were both just tapping into and viewing the potential versions of me. Einstein actually discussed how time is an illusion with the twin paradox, which states, if you shoot one twin into outer space at light speed, bring him back a year later, he'd be a year older. His twin would be, I forget, something like 15 years older or something like that. I believe, psychic information being downloaded by a person who has worked out their psychic muscle, so to speak, the same way, LeBron James honed his basketball skills by constantly practicing, is just the act of accessing the master database of all the events that, have ever or will ever happen to retrieve specific information about a particular individual. In this case, they were both just pulling my file. Some people refer to this database of all things as the Akashic Records. And as many mainstream physicists now hypothesize that there are multiple versions of reality, this reality is only one universe in a multiverse of alternate realities that plays out in the timeless state of eternity. I believe this is where, when you look at it like this, I believe this is where free will meets destiny. It's kind of like a video game. It's all already in there. It's all been played out before. God is, or whatever you want to call it, the universe, your higher self, is vast enough to play out every single possibility. As Pablo Picasso put it, everything you can imagine is real. But the choices you make this time around is what dictates which version of reality actually shows up for you to witness this time around. The channel you tune into, so to speak, the same way we tune our televisions and radios, dictates which version of your own movie shows up in your physical reality. So from where I was sitting at that moment in time, when the first psychic did my reading, those were the two strongest potential Brandons that would play out based on the choices I had made up to that point in my life and considering which realities I was resonating strongest with at that given moment. But anyway, before I get off on that tangent too much longer and manifest a version of reality where my first podcast is 10 hours long, I better get back to my story. So we came out to California. We never really made it to the big time like we had hoped, but we did get a development deal of sorts with Elektra Records, where they put us in the studio with an awesome producer, Jim Wirt, who had produced several of our favorite bands like Incubus. We also developed a bit of a following, played some shows with some bands that went on to make it fairly big. For example, I still have a flyer from a show with us, a band who made it pretty big called Hoobastank. Some of you may remember Alien Ant Farm, who you might remember for their rock remake of Michael Jackson's Smooth Criminal, and a band that at the time called themselves Hybrid Theory, who went on actually a few months later, I think, to change their name to Linkin Park. I remember, actually that show, we were the last band to do sound check at that particular show. And after we stepped off stage, the sound guy came up to me and he was telling me how he has seen, so many bands over the years and how we really had something unique and special. I always jokingly say that in another Earth timeline, the guys in Linkin Park are probably flipping burgers somewhere, and we were the ones making people's ears bleed by being played incessantly on all the big rock radio stations. But anyway, being in a band, wasn't all glamorous and easy, that's for sure. It was like being married to 4 other people, and we definitely had our fair share of challenges and struggles. My son Bradley came as a huge surprise in 1998 to add to the complexity of being in a struggling band thousands of miles away from our friends and family support, back east. But looking back, I wouldn't change any of it for the world. My son, of course, is the greatest blessing in my life. All of it truly was an amazing life experience. Towards the end of our career in Kundalini, we got a great new bass player, Damian Young. His brother, Adrian Young, was the world-famous drummer from the rock band No Doubt. You might remember him as the guy who would always forget to put his pants on for performances in their early years. But yeah, they're an amazing band. They definitely stood the test of time. Actually, I think they're in the process of making another album, if I'm not mistaken. So still going strong. One of the highlights, my personal highlights from my career in Kundalini, was when Adrian came up to me after a show at the Roxy in Hollywood, wearing pants, thank goodness. And he said how much he loved the band and how my performance in particular had blown him away that night. Now, never mind the fact that he had downed a baker's dozen of kamikaze shots on our party bus that we all took up to Hollywood that night to blow himself away by the time we actually went on stage. Nonetheless, that's something, I always remembered, and it was really cool to hear something like that from someone whose band had, they had the most played song on the FM dial worldwide a few years prior to that. These days, actually, Adrian still, and Damien, friends of mine. Adrian's actually a business partner now after investing with a company I started a few years back. I'll be discussing more about that in a few minutes. But as far as Kundalini goes, even though we never made it big, we made some amazing memories. I learned a very valuable lesson through our 8 years together. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. The journey is the goal. So if any of you out there listening are struggling musicians or struggling to make it somewhere in any given field that is creative or otherwise, the best advice I can give to you is don't miss out on the journey by being caught up on having to make it to the big time to be happy. I mean, looking back on Kundalini, that's the biggest regret I have. In the later years, we were so focused on thinking we needed to make it somewhere other than where we were at, we stopped having fun. Meanwhile, there was so much fun going on all around us that we were missing out on because of our, flawed perspective. Now, keep in mind, throughout this time period, since we weren't exactly getting paid millions of dollars for our artistic endeavors, I usually held some sort of sales job to support myself, or I was attempting to support myself with one of my many, entrepreneurial ventures. I started out at the gate with a few hits in a row with candy and pressure washing. But the next 5 or so things I tried over the years ended up ultimately failing. So after, 8 years of squeaking by financially, trying to make it with Kundalini, we finally threw in the towel. I was, I think, 30 years old at that time, flat broke, according to conventional wisdom, had made a series of poor decisions to pursue my artistic dreams instead of using my college degree to build stability in my life. To add to the pressure, my son was pretty much staying with me full-time at this point, so I was a single full-time father. So I ended up just kind of unsure on what direction to take. I tried to launch a few more business ideas with little to no startup capital, all of which, ultimately failed. For several years, I ended up working for various sales organizations, but I still always had that itch to do and be something more and felt in my heart that it was, still my destiny regardless of external circumstances. One issue I kept facing was, even though I was very good at sales and had broken sales records at almost every sales organization I'd ever worked at, I just wasn't the type of person that could ever be content working for someone else. a part of me refused to give up on my dreams and was intent on creating magic in my life. And I just knew in my heart that I could manifest anything if I was just in vibrational alignment with whatever reality I wanted to create. So in my mid-30s, I came up with a new master plan. I was really missing making music at that time and decided I wanted to make a solo album, and I would launch it through what I viewed as my greatest brainchild idea yet, a unique new music distribution platform I called Industry Music Network. After being inspired by a positive paranormal event that I will share with you in the next podcast that seemed to urge me to pursue the project at all costs, I was convinced that Industry, that's spelled with Tree, Industry was going to revolutionize the music business. I came up with the idea around 2005, and I won't go into much detail about it here for time's sake, but it basically uses a model I called social music sharing that allowed fans to make money promoting artists. The traditional music business was really starting to flounder at that time due to file sharing and MP3s, but it wasn't until a few years later, around 2008, that I actually set out to build Industry, yet again with very little money that my brother put up from a credit card that he was able to get, and it turned out to be just enough for me to build what I refer to as the Model T version of the website after over a year of painstakingly going back and forth with programmers in India. Now, during that time, as I mentioned, I also started recording my own solo album under the name Try B, Try-BE. I thought it was pretty clever since my name, Brandon Brent Beachum, consists of 3 B's. And, since I was also striving to just be at peace with whatever is in my life, which is, often taught as the foundational essence of pursuing a spiritual lifestyle, learning to just be without attachment or expectation, I saw it as a meaningful coincidence that my initials are BBB. As far as learning to just be, well, easier said than done, of course, but hence the trying part of my name, especially at that time. For me, it was very exciting to be, of course, making music again. And this time around, it was just me with help from the super musically talented Dalian, who was figuring out how to use music production software for the first time. I actually use a snippet from my song Love Transmissions off that album at the beginning of the podcast. And you can check out the rest of the album we ended up making on SoundCloud. I think it's soundcloud.com/try-B. But anyway, as I mentioned earlier, I really viewed my rhymes as poetry and as a poetic way to get my message to the world. And, with my solo album, I really viewed it as sort of a handbook on how to live life in an expanded state of awareness and how to create a life based on understanding the ultimate nature of reality while channeling our divine, creative potential. Of course, when I made the album, I was still figuring this all out for myself. And, as I mentioned to this day, I still consider myself way more of a student than a teacher regarding such topics. But I found that, the more I talk about spiritual topics, the better I feel. And I always say that I'm talking to remind myself as much or more than whoever may be listening to me, ran about this stuff. So anyway, after over a year of, putting my master plan together, I somehow managed to pull off a soft launch of Industry to test the site. I had very little money to market the site with that had come from a couple friends who invested a few $1,000 each, but plus the money that my brother had put in. But and that was all gone by that point. And in spite of all that, the site really started growing organically, and we got up to a few thousand users, both artists and fans, very quickly. And that's when the shit pretty much hit the fan. My brother, who was, as I mentioned, my business partner, had a recent ex-girlfriend who had also been my roommate for about 6 months. She committed suicide. And a big reason was she was so devastated over their breakup. As you can imagine, my brother, very sensitive guy, devastated beyond words, couldn't even think about business anymore. He immediately moved back to Virginia to stay with my parents for a while because he was such a wreck over what had happened with his ex-girlfriend, whom he still, loved dearly at that time. immediately after that, the investor I had pulled out the little bit of money he was still planning to invest. I was left alone with no money and a dream that appeared to be fizzling fast. I had put so much of my heart and soul into industry and my album. My brother had done the same with his own music project called The Variants that he also collaborated with Dalian on. And, The Variants album is actually quite brilliant. It is really a shame that just like my own album, it never even got released as planned because the launch of Industry, where it was going to be promoted, had basically come to a screeching halt before, it had hardly began. But you can also find the Variants album on SoundCloud too. It was recently put on there if you ever want to check it out. If you search the Variants music, I think. So anyway, I rallied to try and find a new investor for Industry. I actually got a new investor to commit to putting in like 50 grand, only to renege on their agreement a few weeks later and kind of back out. I still believed in Industry, wanted to make it happen at this point, but I was absolutely fed up with dealing with investors. So I had decided I had to find a way to manifest the money myself. I thought, look, if I'm one with the universe, God, source, whatever you want to call it, I should be able to manifest whatever resources I need to do this. The universe will provide. So I set the intention to fund the Industry project myself without having the slightest clue as to how I would do it. I just thought if I believed it, I could achieve it, assuming I wasn't afraid to take action and work for it. About this time, I went back to Virginia for the Christmas holiday, and me and my brother got together with our old friend Paul, who had been the singer in Kundalini, but he had moved back to Virginia after the band broke up many years earlier. Me and Ryan both needed to find jobs at that point since our plans for greatness with Industry had evaporated. Ryan needed a job in Virginia since he was planning to stay there a while he recovered, from the tragedy of losing his girlfriend, to have family support and everything. I needed a job back in California. So our friend Paul had been working at a timeshare company and had mentioned he thought both of us would do really well in sales there. And he mentioned that despite the economy being, really in a bad recession at that time, salespeople were still making great money where he worked. Ryan and I knew nothing about timeshare. Ryan figured he had nothing else to lose, so he got a job at a resort in Virginia right away. When I came back to California, I looked into it and I learned that I happen to live fairly close to many resorts as well. So I applied at one and got hired. After my 2-week intensive training, they put me out on the sales floor. I pretty much sold nothing during those first few weeks. However, my entrepreneurial wheels started turning almost immediately as I learned more about the timeshare business. And I recognized almost, within those first few weeks, there was a huge void in the market for someone to step in and help timeshare owners manage and rent out their timeshares to offset their, ongoing monthly maintenance fees. So about the time in my career there, I guess you'd call it, management told me I was sucking so bad at sales, I needed to go back into training. I told them thanks, but no thanks, and that I appreciated the opportunity. And I set out to start, another entrepreneurial venture, a timeshare management and rental company. At the time, I thought to myself, this could be the path to make enough money to fund Industry and enable me to do it right without having to worry about other investors. I put it out to the universe that I wanted to manifest a path to making a significant amount of money to fund Industry just a few months earlier. And now it seemed like the universe, coupled with my faith, had delivered, a serious opportunity on my doorstep, and I intended to try and make the most of it. Somehow I was able to test my model, get the business started with literally just, a few $100 in my pocket. And after seeing that my small scale test was successful with about a dozen clients or so, my brother quit his job in Virginia, moved back to California to partner with me and another close friend and former business partner, Jay. And we all three set out to try and build, a big timeshare management and rental business. Little did I know just how much potential there was in what we all three set out to do. Because now, today, 4.5 years later or so, we currently have around 70 employees. Just received a 9-figure valuation from a highly reputable valuation firm. And that is, of course, all super exciting. But compared to the potential and where it's on track to go in the next few years, well, let's just say if it all goes as planned, it goes well, I anticipate my son's kids would never have to work again. Well, at least until I donate all my money to charity. But no, after bringing on a fourth partner within the last year, which whom is a highly successful, well-known businessman, best known for growing his own company from less than $1 million in revenue annually to over $1 billion company in like 6 years, I think it took him. I finally, with him coming on board, had the opportunity to lead the day-to-day operations of our company, which we recently rebranded under the name Resort Share, by the way. And yeah, having someone with such a high level of experience and expertise join our team, I finally felt comfortable enough to leave the day-to-day operations so that I could pursue my passionate dream of helping to expand consciousness on this planet. I am also, very thankful that my partners have all supported me in this endeavor. I'm truly, truly blessed to have such amazing friends and highly capable partners. So that's how I ended up where I am today, launching, this Positive Head podcast and also the positivehead.com website. If you haven't been on the website yet, you should check out the Positive Head bracelet we're also marketing. It's essentially a unique tool based on successful cognitive conditioning studies where they've used in the past, you may have heard of it, a rubber band to snap themselves whenever they're having negative thoughts or emotions. So instead of using a rubber band, we designed a really cool looking bracelet made out of recycled tires and recycled metal. So that's on the site. Lastly, the site also features a daily inspirational quote or positive pondering on the Positive Head blog that we then, give a detailed breakdown interpretation of each day. So, as far as other projects, I plan to, of course, finally revisit the industry project in the very near future as well. I'm also getting back to making music again with Dalian under the name Tribe this time. TRIBE, sort of like the try-BE from before, but instead of trying to be this time around, I see it as me and Dalian coming together and forming a tribe of two with our music that, of course, we hope ultimately expands to inspire many others. If not, that's okay too, because one thing I've definitely learned when it comes to any form of creative expression, you have to do it for yourself because you love that form of creative expression. And if other people end up appreciating it too, hey, even better, but ultimately that's just a bonus. As far as what it sounds like, well, you'll just have to check it out for yourself. One thing's for sure, I doubt anyone will ever debate it's unique. Someone asked me what genre it was the other day, and I told them it's quirk hop tronica. Of course, I just made that up off the top of my head. I kind of like it, and since we really don't sound like anything else out there, and since I strongly dislike titles and putting people in boxes anyway, might as well make up a genre. Hey, why not? Me and Dalian just recently got back at it. We're both very busy with other projects too, of course, so we haven't quite completed any tracks to put out there for you guys to listen to if you want to check it out. But I'll let you know when we have some fresh, amazingly weird tribe music that you can check out. Let's see. Lastly, I'm also just completing my first book that I am co-authoring with my very talented author friend, Christopher Ponzi. The book is entitled The Fountain of You. The premise is how the marriage of science and spirituality is birthing us into the age of timelessness. I was originally going to call it 40 is the New 20, but we were concerned that it would isolate people who were considerably older or younger than 40, so we changed it to The Fountain of You. The inspiration to write the book came to me as my 40th birthday was approaching, which I actually just had in last July. A few months prior to that, I had the epiphany that it really is like I am about to turn 20 years old if you factor in all the incredible, advances in science and technology today, where you have mainstream scientists confidently stating that the first person to live healthily to 150 is probably 50 or 60 right now. Then you combine those scientific advances with my personal understanding of the law of attraction and the ultimate nature of reality, and how I feel supremely confident that I can utilize it to, maintain a youthful state of mind and youthful energy. So I thought, based on all this, it really does make a ton of sense for me to approach everything in my life as if I was turning 20 years old. I've decided when I'm confronted with any new project or situation that I would think of it in those terms. Would I start that new business if I was turning 20 instead of 40? Would I still make music if I was turning 20 instead of 40? Would I, learn that new sport, launch a podcast? So yeah, I'm very excited to get my first book out to the world as well. And I got to say that living as a 20-year-old my second time around has been pretty amazing so far. It's that perspective that also led me, of course, to doing, this podcast, like I mentioned. So Anyway, enough about me. Hopefully this gives you all better insight into who I am, where I've been, more importantly, where I'm going, so that you have a good idea of what you're getting yourself into when you listen in each week. I really hope that in some small way my story inspires you to never give up on your own dreams. As a quote I recently saw that I absolutely love states, "Your dream doesn't have an expiration date. Take a deep breath and try again." I can definitely resonate with that concept. And as I said when I first began this podcast, I genuinely appreciate you taking the time to listen and playing a role in the fulfillment of my own, lifelong dream of getting my message out to the world by doing so. As I also mentioned on the next podcast, I'll be introducing you all to my co-host, Dalian, and also sharing some personal stories of synchronicity, what I refer to as real magic, positive paranormal events that I've experienced in my own life. So until next time, remember, as long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Take care, everyone.